Chapter 1. The Silent Scream. The rain on Varnian Prime wasn't gentle. It was a serrated, bone-deep cold, driven by winds that sculpted the obsidian plains into grotesque, shifting sculptures. The air tasted of iron and something ancient, something that clung to the bone. It was a fitting accompaniment to the despair that had settled over the High Council's deliberations. On the holographic projection dominating the council chamber, a shimmering, pearl-toned representation of Varnian Prime. The violet glow of a dying city pulsed weakly. Once, it had been a testament to Varnian artistry, a symphony of light and sound woven into its very architecture. Now, shattered towers clawed at the bruised purple sky, monuments to a brutal, swift defeat. The casualty estimates are unacceptable, Councilor Lyra lamented, her voice a carefully modulated tremor. Her form, perpetually shaded in a soothing teal, flickered slightly as she adjusted the data stream. 378 confirmed casualties. Estimates are pushing towards 5,000. And the Krell are advancing. The Krell. The very name was a guttural rasp of destruction, a reflection of their chitinous bodies and the way they devoured worlds. They were a race of relentless pragmatism, their philosophy distilled into a single terrifying axiom: might makes right. For centuries, the Galactic Council, a collection of bureaucratic empires, philosophical enclaves, and frankly, terrified spectators, had observed the Krell's expansion with a detached, clinical interest. They were a pressure point, a contained variable, a stark reminder of the universe's indifference. And the Varnians, with their delicate sensibilities and insistence on pursuing the aesthetic beauty of suffering, were a level 1 civilization. Therefore, expendable. High Councilor Theron, a being of polished granite and weary contemplation, tapped a crystalline stylus against the holographic table. The Council's assessment remains unchanged. The Varnian sector is a low-priority target. The Krell are engaged in a protracted, resource-intensive campaign against the Krill hegemony. Intervention would destabilize the entire Krellian chain of command, potentially escalating into a full-scale galactic conflict. The acceptable loss ratio is deemed to be a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. A ripple of muted agreement passed through the council. The arguments were well worn, the justifications polished to a sterile sheen. The Varnians' distress signal, a desperate wide-band transmission intended for the forbidden void, the empty sector surrounding the Sol system, had been routed through the council's automated monitoring network. The network, built on algorithms designed to filter out low-value signals, had flagged the transmission as a potential system error. It was flagged again, and again. Each time, the response was the same: scrubbed, categorized as a localized anomaly, and ultimately ignored. Meanwhile, on Varnian Prime, the Krell's advance was relentless. Dropships, hulking behemoths of dark chitin and razor-edged weaponry, rained down on the capital city. Varnian defenses, based on intricate energy shields and meticulously crafted sonic weaponry defenses designed to repel, not destroy, were systematically dismantled. The Krell didn't attempt to negotiate. They didn't offer terms. They simply destroyed. Then, the signal came. Not a plea for mercy, not a demand for assistance. Just a burst of raw, rhythmic data, a pulsing, mechanical heartbeat that cut through the chaos. It originated not from a Varnian device, but from something else. Varnian High Command. This is the UF Wrath of Sol. We heard your signal. We aren't much like bullies, and we've been looking for an excuse to test our new engines. Hold tight. Help is 3 seconds away. The voice, gravelly and deep, vibrated through the council chamber. A physical assault. It was filtered through countless layers of galactic communication networks, yet it possessed an undeniable, unnerving intensity. It emanated from a vessel unlike anything the council had ever encountered. The council chamber fell silent. Theron slowly raised a hand, his granite face betraying nothing. Identify the source of this intrusion. The reply came instantly, a data stream flooding the holographic table. The source, the UF Wrath of Sol. United Earth Federation. A military alliance of human colonies scattered across the Outer Rim, known for their brutal efficiency, their reliance on heavy industrial technology, and their unsettlingly pragmatic approach to warfare. The data revealed the origin of the Wrath of Sol, the Sol system. The very system the Council had quarantined for millennia. The system where humanity's volatile civilization had been confined, deemed a threat to the established galactic order. The Council hadn't realized that the quarantine was merely a cage, built to contain a force far more potent than they imagined. A force that had, until now, been silent. Chapter 2. The Iron Cord. The silence in the council chamber, once broken by the jarring intrusion, now felt heavier, pregnant with a dread the polished obsidian and chrome couldn't conceal. Councilor Lyra, a staunch advocate for the Varnians' natural evolution, sputtered. Impossible. The Sol system. The quarantine protocols, they are absolute. Theron, High Councilor of the Concordance, remained impassive. He activated a secondary display, pulling up a detailed schematic of the Wrath of Sol. The image was a brutal paradox. A behemoth of darkened steel and pulsing fusion cores, bristling with archaic but devastating weaponry. It was a ship built for impact, for annihilation, utterly unsuited for the nuanced politics of the galactic concordance. The Wrath of Sol is a Class 7 dreadnought, designation Tempest, deployed from the Sol system's primary fleet. A synthesized voice reported from the Council's central processor. The vessel's designation was previously classified designated dormant until sensor anomalies detected a distress signal originating from the Varnian sector. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled councilors. The Tempest was a relic, a ghost ship dredged from the archives of the First Terran War. It hadn't been active for centuries, deactivated as a symbol of humanity's supposed self-imposed exile. The fact that it had responded to the Varnians' cry for help was impossible. Analyze the ship's technology, Theron commanded, his voice low and measured. Prioritize adaptive countermeasures. We need to understand how this anomaly bypassed the Concordance's security systems. The response was immediate, a torrent of data parsing across the holographic table. The Tempest wasn't utilizing any known technology. Its communication system wasn't reliant on electromagnetic waves. Instead, it seemed to be manipulating the very fabric of space-time, projecting its voice directly into the minds of the Varnians. The effect was unnerving, a violation of fundamental principles of interstellar communication. The signal is routed through a localized distortion field, the chief analyst, a young man named Kale, announced, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's almost as if the ship is listening to the void itself. The signal's harmonics match the background radiation of the forbidden void, but with a subtly altered frequency. Suddenly, the room's emergency lighting flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the faces of the councilors. A low, rhythmic hum filled the chamber, growing steadily louder. Then a holographic projection flickered to life. A single, intensely blue eye, multifaceted and utterly devoid of emotion. Analysis complete, the eye announced, its voice a perfect echo of the gravelly rumble that had initially contacted the Varnians. The Varnians are not in immediate danger. The Krell Empire is contained. However, the situation requires a more decisive intervention. Theron's hand shot out, stopping the projection. Silence this intrusion. Determine the source of the Tempest's activation. Was it a rogue AI? A malfunction? We must isolate this threat before it escalates. Before anyone could respond, a second, smaller projection appeared, this one displaying a grainy, infrared image of the Varnian capital, Ethel. The Tempest was already there, hovering just above the planet's surface, unloading squads of heavily armored soldiers. The Wrath of Sol has initiated ground operations, the synthesized voice stated, unconcerned with the Council's escalating panic. Deployment commencing. Objective neutralize Krell resistance. Estimated completion time 17 minutes, 43 seconds. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Councilor Voran, a renowned strategist, shouted, "They're attacking Athel! This isn't a response, it's a full-scale invasion." Theron, however, remained strangely calm. He turned to Admiral Marcus Reed, the holographic projection of whom appeared with an unsettlingly casual air, an apple resting in his hand, slowly being bitten into. "Admiral Reed," Theron stated, his voice laced with controlled fury. "Explain yourself. What prompted this unilateral action?" Reed took a large bite of the apple, juice running down his chin. "Let's just say," he said, chewing thoughtfully, "the Varnians needed a reminder of what happens when you ignore a warning. The Council decided they were too volatile to bother with. We didn't. We've got a problem, and we're using the tools we've got." He paused, his blue eyes, mirroring the Tempest's, fixated on Theron. "And frankly, you lot were going to let the Varnians get wiped out." As Reed spoke, the rhythmic pulse of the wrath of Saul intensified, a steady, insistent heartbeat echoing through the council chamber. It was a declaration, a metallic chord struck in the silence of the galaxy, a resounding testament to humanity's brutal, uncompromising power. The galaxy had ignored the cry for help, but the Deathworlders of Earth had answered with thunder. The silence that followed Reed's pronouncements was thick with disbelief and simmering rage. Councilor Voran sputtered, his face the color of a bruised plum. "Unilateral? You've violated the Treaty of Concordance. You've shattered the galactic quarantine. This is madness." Reed didn't flinch. He continued to meticulously consume his apple, a small, unsettling ritual amidst the chaos. "The Treaty of Concordance is a suggestion, Voran, not a law, Dado. And the quarantine was a judgment passed by a council too busy debating the nuances of interspecies diplomacy to recognize a blatant act of aggression." He swallowed the last bite, a fleck of crimson clinging to his lip. The Varnians were about to be vaporized. "Do you honestly think a suggestion mattered then?" Theron, ever the pragmatic one, cut through the rising storm. "Admiral, while I appreciate your directness, your actions necessitate a strategic assessment. The Krell are deploying a planetary bombardment unit designation Stormbringer aimed at Athel. Their initial assault is focused on disrupting our supply lines and establishing a beachhead. We need a coordinated response, not a rogue intervention." "Coordination is overrated," Reed retorted, his voice gaining an edge. "The Council's coordination got the Varnians into this mess. They waited for someone else to solve the problem. We're not interested in coordinating, we're interested in winning." He gestured toward the holographic displays, showcasing the unfolding battle over Varnian space. The wrath of Saul, a silhouette of brutal efficiency, was systematically dismantling Krell squadrons. The projected casualties, a horrifying statistic of shimmering red dots, were climbing exponentially. "The Stormbringer is a sophisticated weapon," Theron argued, bringing up schematics of the Krell's latest offensive. "It utilizes a phase shift field to bypass our energy shielding. We need to analyze its weaknesses, anticipate its movements. Analyzing weaknesses takes time," Reed interrupted, a hint of impatience in his tone. "And the Varnians don't have time. The Stormbringer will obliterate their capital within the hour. I've ordered a counterstrike, a coordinated mass driver barrage targeting the Stormbringer's core. Let's see if the Council can figure out how to stop a missile the size of a small moon from detonating." A junior officer, Lieutenant Kai, a young man struggling to maintain composure amidst the escalating tension, piped up. "Admiral, the mass drivers, they're incredibly inefficient. The energy expenditure, it's unsustainable." Reed simply smiled, a chillingly devoid expression. "Inefficiency is a luxury we can't afford, Lieutenant. Besides," he added, his gaze sweeping over the room, "you'll find that the Deathworlders aren't built for elegance." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the council chamber. A new holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a chaotic scene at Krell boarding party, attempting to seize control of the Wrath of Saul's forward weapons bay day. "They're bypassing our automated defenses," cried a technician, frantically inputting commands. "Shields are collapsing. We're losing control of the targeting systems." Reed remained utterly calm, his face impassive. Looks like someone forgot to account for the fact that Krell soldiers aren't exactly known for their strategic thinking. He activated a wrist-mounted device, unleashing a concentrated pulse of electromagnetic interference. The Krell's targeting systems sputtered and died. "What's happening?" Theron demanded, his voice tight with urgency. "MP burst," the technician explained, his voice strained. "Disrupted their targeting arrays. It's temporary, but then make it permanent," Reed said, his voice dripping with a cold satisfaction. "Initiate Protocol Omega. Wow." Protocol Omega was a system-wide denial of communications, a complete severing of all electronic links for the Krell forces. It was a tactic gleaned from ancient, almost mythical, Earth military doctrine, a brutal, uncompromising approach designed to neutralize the enemy's technological advantage. As the last vestiges of electronic communication vanished, the tide of the battle shifted dramatically. The Krell, stripped of their sophisticated targeting systems, became a disorganized, savage horde, their attacks becoming increasingly desperate and futile. The Wrath of Saul, now operating with a terrifying intuitive understanding of the battlefield, unleashed a devastating counteroffensive, utilizing the mass drivers with terrifying precision. Councilor Varnian, witnessing the complete annihilation of the Krell boarding party, slumped in his chair, defeated. It's brutal," he whispered, the word laced with a profound sense of unease. Reed leaned forward, his eyes locked on Theron's. "Brutal is effective," he said, his voice a low, rumbling growl. The galaxy ignored the cry for help. But the Deathworlders of Earth answered with thunder. "And you, Theron, are about to learn that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't intelligence, it's raw, unbridled force." He took another, deliberate bite of his apple, the crimson juice staining his chin a deeper shade of red, a stark, unsettling symbol of humanity's unleashed power. Chapter 4. The Echo of Thunder, the immediate aftermath of Protocol Omega, was a chaotic, beautiful mess. The Krell, disoriented and furious, devolved into a lumbering, screaming tide. Their sleek, chitinous armor, designed for disciplined coordination, became a hindrance as individual commanders, stripped of tactical data and communication, flailed wildly, firing blindly into the swirling vortex of depleted uranium. The Wrath of Saul's broadsides became a choreographed ballet of annihilation, each mass driver shot precisely calibrated to exploit the Krell's panicked movements. The Varnian High Command, initially stunned into silence, quickly grasped the significance. The rhythmic, metallic pulse of the UF fleet wasn't just a response, it was a demonstration. They watched, holographic displays flickering with the carnage, as human crews, clad in heavily armored combat suits, moved with a terrifying grace amidst the destruction, dismantling Krell squads with brutal efficiency. "Their aggression is unsettlingly precise," muttered Councilor Lyra, a renowned xenolinguist, adjusting her optical implants. "It lacks the inherent messiness of a species driven by instinct. It's calculated brutality." Reed, observing the scene through a secure channel, allowed himself a grim smile. "That's the point, Councilor," he said, his voice carrying the same weight as the approaching storm. "We're not messier. We're better. We use the tools we have to solve the problem. And right now, the problem is a very persistent, very unpleasant bunch of conquerors." The UF, however, wasn't content simply grinding the Krell into dust. Their initial offensive had been about containment, about demonstrating the consequences of aggression. Now, it was becoming something more decisive. Admiral Reed, having observed the Varnians' desperate situation, began to shift the fleet's focus. He issued a series of direct commands, bypassing the Council entirely a blatant act of authority that sent tremors through the interstellar bureaucracy. Deploy boarding parties to key Krell command ships, Reed ordered. Prioritize systems disruption communications, relays, engine cores, anything that prevents them from coordinating. He paused, his gaze fixed on the holographic battlefield. Let's show them exactly what a Level 1 civilization can do when it's pissed off. The response was immediate and terrifying. Teams of UF Marines, clad in advanced combat suits capable of adapting to varying environments, deployed from the Wrath of Sol's numerous docking bays. These weren't the sleek, almost ethereal fighters of the Council's fleet. They were brutal, heavily armored land ships designed for close-quarters combat. Armed with rapid-firing, high-caliber pulse cannons and equipped with devastating melee weaponry, they descended upon the Krell vessels like a storm of steel. On the Varnian capital, the battle was a chaotic ballet of destruction. Human Marines, using their superior strength and agility, moved through the ruined streets of the Varnian cities, taking down Krell soldiers with brutal efficiency. The Krell, accustomed to overwhelming firepower, were utterly unprepared for this brutal, close-range warfare. A single human Marine, wielding a modified combat knife, cleaved through a dozen Krell warriors before being swarmed by a panicked, snapping mob. The Marines responded with calculated bursts of gunfire, eliminating the threats with cold, efficient precision. "They move like ghosts," gasped Councilor Theron, his face pale with terror. "But ghosts that kill." Reed, monitoring the progress, chuckled. "Ghosts are just slow, messy things, Theron. We're reminding them of that." The tactical advantage continued to shift decisively in favor of the UF Toy. The Krell, initially confident in their superior numbers, were now facing a relentless, almost inhuman force, a force built on raw strength, adaptive tactics, and a chilling disregard for their enemies' well-being. However, the Krell weren't entirely defenseless. Utilizing their inherent resilience, their chitinous armor, they began to mount a series of desperate counterattacks, attempting to break through the UF's lines. But the UF, anticipating this, deployed advanced countermeasures, automated sentry turrets, deploying a spray of high-pressure sonic blasts that disrupted the Krell's movements, and specialized grapple drones that neutralized their armor-piercing weaponry. As the final Krell command ship, the Iron Maw, exploded in a blinding flash of energy, Reed's voice resonated across the battlefield. Situation nominal. Krell forces effectively neutralized. Commence salvage operations. He paused, taking a final, deliberate bite of his apple. The juice ran down his chin, a vibrant stain against the grim landscape of a world utterly destroyed. "Let this be a lesson, Council," he said, his voice dripping with icy certainty. "The galaxy might have ignored your concerns about the Varnians, but when humanity gets involved, it always gets involved. And we always bring the thunder." Chapter 5. The price of silence. The silence following the Iron Maw's annihilation was more oppressive than the continued barrage of Krell artillery. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was the unnerving stillness that precedes a catastrophic avalanche. The salvage teams, a mixture of UF engineers and surprisingly efficient Varnian technicians, a testament to the urgency of the situation, began the methodical process of stripping the wreckage of the command ship, seeking any salvageable technology, any trace of the Krell's war plans. Admiral Reed, however, remained perched on a salvage command console, his apple a greasy testament to his unwavering focus, a silent, watchful sentinel. "Analysis complete," reported Lieutenant Jackson, a young, sharp-eyed engineer whose helmet was already smeared with grime and a faint sheen of burnt metal. The Iron Maw was running a standard adaptive armor protocol. Their chitin plating was remarkably resilient to directed energy, but it fractured under sustained pressure, particularly at the joints. Reed nodded, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction in his steely gray eyes. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Dispatch a squad to reinforce the perimeter defenses. We've got scattered Krell remnants attempting to consolidate around the shattered remains of the Starfall Ridge, a particularly nasty piece of terrain. The grav-plated canyons are creating difficult maneuvering conditions. The UF's tactics were evolving with unnerving speed. Initially, their aggression had been driven by a blunt force response, the mass drivers, the sheer overwhelming firepower. But the Krell's stubborn resilience, coupled with the strategic value of the Varnian sector, demanded a more nuanced approach. Reed, a veteran of countless volatile conflicts, had recognized that simply destroying the enemy wasn't a solution, it was a recruitment tool. He issued a new directive: implement Phase 2 attrition. Our primary objective is no longer annihilation, but degradation. We bleed them dry. Utilize the sentry turrets to harass supply lines, disrupt communication, and inflict maximum casualties. Let them fight amongst themselves. As the UF forces shifted their strategy, the Varnians, initially bewildered and grateful, began to observe with a chillingly logical detachment. They were, after all, philosophers by nature, and the UF's approach was disturbingly efficient. High Councilor Lyra, a being of luminous pale flesh and disconcertingly calm composure, approached Reed, accompanied by a small team of her advisors. Admiral Reed, Lyra's voice was a precise, crystalline chime. We have been observing your methods. While we appreciate the cessation of the Krell aggression, we must express a profound concern. Your actions, though undeniably effective, appear wasteful. The destruction of entire combat formations, the erasure of an entire species, it is a profound expenditure of resources, both material and, dare I say, existential. Reed didn't even look up from his apple. Waste is a luxury we can't afford, Counselor. Every Krell soldier we kill buys us time, strengthens our position, and prevents further escalation. Frankly, your concern for the existential well-being of a species that willingly surrendered to annihilation is touching. He took a deliberate bite, the juice splattering across his lower lip. However, we appreciate the feedback. We will adjust accordingly. Let's try to minimize collateral damage. That's the beauty of death, it can be made more elegant. The adjustment wasn't subtle. The UF, deploying the attrition phase, began a systematic campaign of harassment. The sentry turrets, previously used for short, decisive bursts, now unleashed sustained streams of sonic blasts, driving the Krell back into the ravines. Grapple drones, armed with miniature cutting torches, systematically dismantled the Krell's supply depots, disabling their ability to repair damaged armor. But the Krell were not broken. Their leadership, a collective of brutal, pragmatic warriors, adapted with terrifying speed. They utilized the terrain to their advantage, leveraging the canyon walls for cover, launching ambushes from unexpected angles. They began to employ primitive, almost barbaric tactics: boarding actions, close-quarters combat, anything to overwhelm the UF's superior technology. The price of this strategy, however, was steep. The UF's advanced medical drones, initially dispatched to patch up minor injuries, became overwhelmed with casualties. The Varnians, despite their fragility, proved surprisingly effective in close combat, utilizing their innate understanding of movement and leverage to deliver crippling blows. Reed, observing the battle unfold, didn't seem to care. He simply ate another apple, his face impassive, the gray of his eyes reflecting the chaos and destruction. Suddenly, a shrill alarm cut through the battle. Jackson burst onto the console, his face pale. "Admiral, we've got a breach! A Krell boarding party has infiltrated the Wrath of Saul's primary generator room. They're using thermal lance fire." Reed finally looked up, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Let them come," he said, reaching for another apple. "It's time to demonstrate the true power of the Deathworlders." Chapter 6. The Iron Orchard. The alarm blared, a high-pitched, visceral shriek that rattled the very bones of the Wrath of Saul. Jackson, a young, perpetually stressed engineer, was already frantically rerouting power, his fingers dancing across the holographic console, attempting to isolate the breach. Thick plumes of acrid smoke filled the generator room. The air vibrated with the relentless sizzle of thermal lance energy. Shields at 47%. Containment field failing. Jackson yelled, his voice strained. They're bypassing the magnetic dampeners. Reed, we're losing containment. Reed, a man built of granite and grim determination, didn't move. He simply took a slow, deliberate bite of his apple, the juice running down his chin. A small, unsettling reminder of humanity's tenacity. Let them burn, son, he grunted, his voice a low rumble. Waste their precious energy. It's a luxury they can't afford. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. The impact of a Krell boarding party, armed with phase-shifting melee weapons designed to slice through solid matter, hadn't just been destructive, it had been coordinated. A squad of 6 chitinous warriors, each clad in segmented armor bristling with pulse cannons, had found a weakness in the ship's hull, plating a poorly reinforced junction near the secondary gravity plating. They were using the chaos of the thermal lance attack as cover, a brutal organic wedge pushing towards the heart of the ship's power core. Damn it. Marine Squad Alpha 9 is engaging. They're using the thermal lance feedback to amplify their strikes. Lieutenant Chen, a veteran of countless skirmishes, barked orders over the comms. We need a flanking maneuver, Reed. Something. Reed finally moved. A decisive, almost predatory motion. Deploy the Iron Orchard, he commanded, his voice a command delivered from the depths of a war-hardened mind. The wrath of Sol's internal systems responded with terrifying speed. The entire ship, normally a symphony of calculated power, became a weapon of brutal, organic design. Hydraulic pistons surged, grinding and locking into position. The floor of the generator room, reinforced with a network of hardened steel plates, began to shift. Sections of the deck rose, pivoting on articulated joints, transforming the room into a sprawling, deadly labyrinth. The Krell warriors, momentarily stunned by the sudden transformation, were caught in a cage of grinding metal. The Iron Orchard wasn't designed for tactical advantage, it was designed for annihilation. The articulated plates slammed down with the force of a collapsing building, crushing the Krell warriors beneath tons of reinforced steel. Pulse cannons were ripped from their arms, their targeting systems scrambled by the ship's magnetic interference. But the Krell weren't going down without a fight. Their armor, surprisingly resilient, absorbed a significant amount of the impact. And they weren't alone. From the shadowed gaps in the Iron Orchard, a squad of Varnian warriors, armed with modified grav disruptor pistols, designed to nullify the Krell's momentum, emerged. The Varnians, nimble and quick despite their fragile forms, moved with an almost unsettling grace within the shifting architecture. They utilized their innate understanding of leverage and pressure points, delivering precise blows to the Krell's joints, crippling their movements. The grav disruptors, emitting a high-pitched whine, momentarily slowed the Krell warriors, allowing the Varnians to close the distance. The fight within the generator room was a brutal ballet of metal, flesh, and shattered armor. The Krell, accustomed to brute force, struggled to adapt to the ship's lethal fluidity. Reed, observing the carnage from the bridge, simply continued to eat his apple, his expression unreadable. Shields down to 23%. We're losing coolant circulation. Jackson shrieked, desperately trying to stabilize the situation. Suddenly, a Krell warrior, a hulking brute wielding a massive shock hammer, managed to breach a section of the Iron Orchard's outer shell. He roared, a guttural, unsettling sound, and charged towards the wrath of Sol's primary power core. Reed didn't hesitate. He activated the Hammerfall Protocol, a subroutine designed to overload the ship's power grid and generate a localized temporal distortion, a brief, but intensely destructive, ripple in time. The generator room erupted in a blinding flash of white light. The air crackled with raw energy. The iron orchard convulsed, its articulated plates grinding and locking in a chaotic, self-destructive pattern. The Krell warrior, caught in the temporal distortion, aged and decayed in a matter of seconds, collapsing into a pile of dust and shattered chitin. The Wrath of Sol shuddered, its systems temporarily offline. But the breach was sealed. The iron orchard, now irreparably damaged, remained a testament to human ingenuity and the terrifying efficiency of death. Reed finished his apple, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Report," he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Jackson's voice, strained but steady, crackled over the comms. "Breach contained, Admiral. Shields at 82%. We're running diagnostics on the iron orchard. It's a mess." Reed nodded slowly. "Good. Let's see if we can salvage the wreckage." And then he said, a chilling smile spreading across his face, "Let's find out what this empire is really made of." Chapter 7. The Ash of Empires. The diagnostic reports on the iron orchard were grim. It wasn't just a mess, as Jackson had cautiously phrased it. The temporal distortion, amplified by the orchard's dense, metallic architecture, had ripped apart the Krell's technology on a fundamental level. Their weapon systems, their comms, even their armor plating all scrambled, fragmented, and radiating residual temporal energy. It was a graveyard of shattered ambition. "Admiral," Jackson reported, his voice tight with a mixture of professional concern and something akin to awe. "We've detected pockets of chronal instability throughout the wreckage. It's like the ship itself is still fighting the distortion. And there's something else." "Something else?" Reed's voice was a low rumble. "Elaborate." "We're picking up faint, residual psychic signatures. They're fragmented, chaotic, like the echoes of 1,000 dying thoughts. It's heavily shielded, but we're getting traces of a specific pattern, a highly complex, almost geometrical sequence of emotions. Primarily, fear and regret." Reed paused, a disconcerting silence hanging in the comm channel. "Regret. That's interesting." He took a deliberate bite of his apple, the tartness a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the Wrath of Sol. "Jackson, prioritize containment. Seal off the worst of the chronal bleed. I want a full spectrum analysis of those signatures. Find out what the Krell were feeling as they died." While Jackson and his team wrestled with the chaotic energy signature of the iron orchard, Reed turned his attention to the situation unfolding on Varnian Prime. The initial destruction had been brutal, a swift and decisive demonstration of human firepower. The Krell, accustomed to overwhelming force, had crumbled before the Deathworlders' relentless assault. But their retreat hadn't been orderly. They were unleashing a desperate, brutal counteroffensive, utilizing repurposed mining drones and armored transports, a chaotic, swarming force determined to make the humans pay for their intrusion. Admiral Sergeant Petrov's voice, a gruff, seasoned veteran, crackled over the comms. "We've got a problem. The Krells adapted. They're using salvage drones to harass our positions. They're employing thermal camouflage surprisingly effective against our mass drivers. And they've unearthed something." "What have they unearthed?" Reed demanded, his tone sharpening. "A massive subterranean facility. It's shielded, heavily fortified. We're detecting a significant energy signature, something beyond conventional weaponry. It's like a resonance field. It's disrupting our targeting systems." Reed swore under his breath. "Damn them. They're not just fighting. They're evolving. Get those drones pinned down. I want a full tactical overlay of the facility's layout. And Jackson, I want to know what's causing those psychic signatures." Back on the Wrath of Sol, Jackson's team was making a startling discovery. The fragmented psychic signatures weren't just echoes of fear and regret, they were organized. They formed a complex, almost architectural pattern within the residual energy. "It's a map," Dr. Anya Sharma, the ship's chief psycholinguist, announced, her voice filled with a hushed excitement. A schematic of the Krell Empire's command structure. And it's not just a map of locations, it's a map of decisions. Every significant military order, every strategic shift, it's encoded within the psychic resonance. It's as if the Krell were meticulously documenting their own demise. Suddenly, the ship's comms blared with an urgent alert. Admiral, we have a situation. The Iron Orchard is destabilizing. The chronal bleed is intensifying. Shields are down to 60%. Reed's voice was clipped, devoid of panic. Jackson, execute Hammerfall protocol on the Iron Orchard. Full power. This time, let's give them a proper welcome to the 25th century. As the wrath of Saul prepared to unleash another devastating temporal ripple, Reed's attention turned back to the Varnians. Petrov's reports suggested the Krell were preparing a desperate gambit. He suspected a coordinated attack on the Wrath of Saul's primary systems. Petrov, Reed said, his voice now laced with a chilling certainty. I want every available unit focused on the subterranean facility. I believe the Krell are using it to develop a countermeasure against our weapons. And I believe, he paused, a slow smile spreading across his face, that they're preparing to unleash something truly terrifying. The ash of the Krell Empire was falling, but a new storm was gathering on the horizon. The galaxy, it seemed, hadn't just ignored the cry for help, it was bracing itself for a reckoning. Chapter 8. Echoes of Obsidian. The air in the Wrath of Saul's bridge thrummed with barely contained fury. Hammerfall protocol was a brutal, almost surgical application of temporal distortion. A calculated, controlled bleed that fractured the Krell's defenses and left them vulnerable. The Iron Orchard, a strategically vital Krell mining outpost nestled within a volatile chronal pocket, was now a smoking crater of shattered obsidian and panicked chitin. Jackson, the Wrath's chief chronometric engineer, barked orders, his face illuminated by the frantic data streams. Temporal flux stabilizing! Phase 2 initiated. Prepare for localized chronal shockwave. The sudden shift in the Orchard's reality, a momentary freeze, a ripple of accelerated decay, then a complete erasure of the Krell's fighting force was a testament to the UF's unorthodox approach. They weren't fighting with elegant precision, they were fighting with controlled chaos, exploiting the Krell's rigid adherence to conventional warfare. Admiral, Petrov's voice crackled over the comms, his tone laced with the strained urgency of a man staring into an abyss. The subterranean facility is pulsing. The chronal bleed isn't just emanating from it, it's being fed by it. And the energy signature, it's unlike anything we've encountered. It's organized. Deliberate. Reed didn't respond immediately. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the holographic projection of the subterranean facility, a complex of interlocking tunnels and chambers carved deep beneath the Varnian capital, shimmering with unstable chronal energy. Magnify the seismic readings, Jackson. I want to know what's happening down there before it turns the Iron Orchard into a black hole. As Jackson complied, the projection sharpened, revealing a network of crystalline structures within the facility, glowing with an unnerving rhythmic light. The crystals weren't naturally occurring, they were clearly engineered, pulsing with an alien intelligence. Then, movement. Subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable. The crystals were resonating with the temporal distortion emanating from the Wrath of Saul. Admiral! Lieutenant Sharma, the ship's tactical officer shouted, her voice tight with alarm. Multiple Krell units converging on the facility. Approximately 80, advancing in coordinated squads. And they're utilizing chronal shielding. Primitive, but effective. They're resisting the hammerfall. Reed's hand tightened on the console's control stick. Damn them. They anticipated our move. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Petrov, what's the composition of this energy signature? Run a full spectral analysis. I want to know what weapon they're preparing to unleash. The response was agonizingly slow. Analyzing the signature is dominated by chrono-resonance, but there's a secondary component, a dense concentration of null energy. Admiral, it's destabilizing the chronal field. It's like actively fighting against the flow of time. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A wave of nausea swept through the bridge. The Wrath of Sol shuddered violently as the ship's systems struggled to maintain stability. "Shields are dropping," Jackson yelled, his voice strained. "Null energy interference. We're losing containment. It's feeding back into the temporal matrix." Reed swore, a guttural sound of barely controlled rage. "Emergency override. Redirect all available energy to the ablative gravity plating." "Jackson, I want a targeted mass driver strike on the central crystalline structure. Let's see if we can remind them what happens when you mess with a Deathworlder." As the Wrath of Sol responded, unleashing a concentrated barrage of depleted uranium, the Krell units surrounding the subterranean facility unleashed their own devastating weapon. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of silence. A wave of pure, focused null energy erupted from the facility, washing over the Wrath of Sol. Time itself seemed to stutter. The ship's chronometers went haywire. Jackson screamed as the temporal matrix began to unravel. The ship's systems sputtered, threatening to collapse entirely. Then, Reed did something utterly unexpected. He didn't order a retreat. He didn't order repairs. He calmly activated the Wrath's experimental weapon, the echo generator. The echo generator didn't fire projectiles. It fired memories. It didn't broadcast a message. It showed them. The bridge was flooded with holographic projections of the Krell Empire's history, the relentless expansion, the systematic genocide of countless civilizations, the chilling logic of their conquest. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of truth, designed to shatter the Krell's unwavering belief in their own superiority. The effect was immediate. The Krell units froze, their movements becoming jerky, unnatural. They stared at the projections with expressions of horror and disbelief. The coordinated assault dissolved into a chaotic mess of confusion and terror. What is this?" one Krell commander stammered, his chitinous face pale. We are not conquerors. We are nothing." Reed watched the unfolding chaos with grim satisfaction. "It appears," he said, his voice low and resonant, "that even the most entrenched of empires can be undone by the simple truth." But as the last of the Krell units collapsed, frozen in a state of horrified recognition, a new signal erupted from the subterranean facility, a signal far more complex, far more terrifying than anything they'd encountered before. A signal that wasn't fighting against time, but embracing it. A signal that whispered of a power older than the universe, a power that sought to unravel all of reality. The galaxy had ignored the cry for help, but the Deathworlders of humanity had answered with thunder. And now, it seemed, they were facing a storm far greater than they could have imagined. Chapter 9. The echo of unmaking the holographic projections flickered and died, leaving the bridge of the Wrath of Sol in a stark, unsettling silence. The remnants of the Krell assault shattered tanks, crumpled dropships. The still smoking husk of a command center served as a brutal testament to the effectiveness of Reed's calculated gamble. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of ionized particles and the lingering scent of burnt chitin. "That was remarkably efficient," said Commander Eva Rostova, her voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and something approaching awe. She ran a diagnostic on the ship's sensor array, confirming the complete annihilation of the Krell sector force. But the signal, the new signal. "It's not a weapon, Commander. It's a resonance." Reed, still meticulously polishing an apple with a practiced hand, grunted in agreement. "Resonance, tie. That's a good term. It's feeding on the disruption we just created." The Krell believed in order, in the rigid structure of their empire. We shattered that order. Now, something else is drawn to the void. Lieutenant Jian, the ship's xenolinguist, a young man perpetually wired on caffeine and theoretical temporal mechanics, was frantically typing at his console. The signals fluctuating wildly. Admiral. It's not broadcasting in any recognizable language, not even Krell. It's mathematically chaotic. It's as if it's trying to define itself through destruction. He paused, his face pale. And it's focusing on the area around the Varnian capital. Specifically, the subterranean facility where we detected the initial distress call. Damn it, Reed muttered, taking a large bite of the apple. The Varnians weren't just warning us about the Krell. They were unwittingly tapping into something ancient. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the Wrath of Sol. The bridge lights pulsed red, bathing the faces of the crew in a menacing glow. Jian shrieked, "Admiral! The gravitational plating is being overwhelmed. We're experiencing localized distortions, temporal fluctuations. It's pulling space-time apart." The ship groaned, a deep guttural sound that resonated through the metal hull. Outside, the stars themselves seemed to shimmer and distort. A holographic projection materialized, not of a ship or a battlefield, but of a complex, swirling vortex of color and impossible geometry that defied any known laws of physics. Within the vortex, shapes flickered abstract, unsettling forms that seemed to shift and coalesce with a horrifying sentience. "It's not attacking us directly," Reed said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "It's unraveling the fabric of reality around us. The Varnian facility, it's a node, a conduit. And whatever's using it isn't interested in conquest. It's interested in oblivion." The source of the signal was revealed a colossal structure, buried deep beneath the Varnian capital, a monument built not of stone and steel, but of solidified darkness. It pulsed with an internal light, a sickly iridescent green, and hummed with the unsettling energy of the vortex. It wasn't a weapon. It was a machine designed to erase. "That's not a battle," Rostova said, gripping her control stick. "That's a deletion." Reed nodded grimly. The Krell's philosophy was based on the assumption that existence was a problem to be solved, a civilization to be imposed upon. This is the ultimate solution. It doesn't fight. It doesn't conquer. It simply ceases to be. He issued orders with brutal efficiency. "Prepare to deploy the phase disruptors. We're going to jam the signal, buy us some time to understand what we're dealing with. But I don't want a firefight. This isn't about destroying an enemy, it's about preventing an end." The phase disruptors, experimental devices designed to manipulate localized space-time, were activated. They emitted a series of precisely calibrated waves, attempting to disrupt the chaotic resonance emanating from the Varnian facility. For a moment, the swirling vortex seemed to hesitate, its colors momentarily muted. Then, a voice, not through the comm-links, but directly into their minds, a chorus of whispers that felt ancient and utterly alien, spoke. "You seek to contain us. Contain nothing. All things eventually return to the void." The vortex intensified, growing larger, more unstable. The Wrath of Sol shuddered violently as space-time itself began to buckle around them. Jian screamed, "The gravitational plating is failing. We're losing control of our spatial orientation." Reed, his face grim, made a decisive call. "Brace for temporal displacement. We're going to pull us out of this before we're erased entirely." He activated the ship's emergency warp drive, a desperate gamble that pushed the Wrath of Sol to its absolute limit. The world outside dissolved into a chaotic kaleidoscope of color and distorted reality. And the last thing Reed heard was the chilling echo of the entity's voice, growing closer, closer. "Your attempt to preserve is but a fleeting flicker. Embrace the silence." Chapter 10. Echoes in the Fracture. The disorientation slammed into us like a tidal wave. The Wrath of Sol wasn't simply moving, it was being unmade and reassembled. The interior lights flickered, replaced by a nauseating strobe of impossible colors. Jian, strapped into his command chair, was a frozen tableau of terror, his knuckles white against the console. I gripped my armrests, fighting the urge to vomit as the ship groaned under the strain of space-time itself rejecting our presence. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The kaleidoscope vanished. The ship was intact, battered but functional, hanging in a familiar, if unsettling, void. But the sky above wasn't Varnian blue. It was a sickly bruised purple, swirling with constellations that shouldn't exist, and a layer of static that clung to the senses like a physical weight. "Report," Reed barked, his voice strained but maintaining a professional edge. "Gravitational plating holding, Admiral," Gian reported, his voice shaky. "But the readings, they're off the charts. The temporal distortions are residual, fluctuating wildly. We're sitting in a pocket of fractured spacetime." "And the Varnians?" I asked, glancing at the holographic display showing the ravaged remains of their capital. The image was worse than before. The Krell, initially stunned and disorganized by the temporal displacement, had rallied. They weren't attempting a full retreat, but instead, deploying a bizarre, pulsating array of energy weapons devices that seemed to unravel reality itself in small, localized zones. The air shimmered with displaced photons, and the ground was scarred with craters that hadn't formed from conventional weaponry. "The Krell adapted," Reed said, his voice clipped. "They've learned to exploit the instability. They're using the temporal distortions to their advantage." He paused, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "It seems we've given them a fighting chance." "They're not fighting," Lieutenant Ramirez, our tactical officer, shouted over the comms. "They're unraveling. Their ships, their armor, even their soldiers are dissolving, flickering in and out of existence. It's like they're being erased from reality." The source of this was chillingly clear, the entity's whispers. The residual echoes of its voice resonated within the fractured space-time, subtly altering the laws of physics around us. It wasn't directly attacking, it was dismantling. "The phase disruptors," Reed said, his voice tight. "They didn't neutralize it. They merely shifted it. This entire sector is now a resonance chamber for its power." Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. A high-pitched whine filled the bridge as the navigational systems went haywire. Red lights pulsed frantically. "We're being pulled," Gian yelled. "The temporal distortions are intensifying. We're heading towards something." The viewport filled with an impossible geometry, interlocking planes of color, shifting dimensions, and a sense of overwhelming, nauseating rawness. It wasn't a visual phenomenon. It was a feeling of primal, instinctive understanding that we were being drawn into a place outside of time, outside of space, outside of reality itself. Then, we saw it. It wasn't a ship, a weapon, or any recognizable form. It was a void, an absence so profound it seemed to devour light and sound. Within this nothingness, a single immense eye opened, an eye of pure, shimmering darkness that burned with an ancient, unknowable intelligence. The entity spoke again, not through the comms, but directly into our minds, this time with a chillingly intimate tone. "You seek to understand. Understanding is a delusion. You crave control. Control is an illusion. I am the absence of all things." Before we could react, a wave of energy erupted from the eye, washing over the wrath of Sol. It wasn't a blast of force, it was a cascade of pure information, memories, emotions, entire histories, flooding our minds. I saw the universe as it was before time, a chaotic soup of potential, before the laws of physics were even conceived. I saw the rise and fall of countless civilizations, each consumed by their own desires, their own fleeting moments of significance. And I understood, with a horrifying clarity, that the Varnians, the Krell, humanity, we were all insignificant specks in an infinite, uncaring void. When the waves subsided, the eye was gone. The temporal distortions had calmed, the static in the air had cleared, and the purple sky remained. But something had shifted within us. The arrogance, the certainty, The ingrained belief in human dominion that had defined us for so long had been eroded. Reed, his face pale and drawn, said quietly, "We're not fighting an enemy. We're fighting a concept. And I don't think we have a chance." He turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "Let's get out of here. Let's go home." As we initiated warp drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were meant leaving the void. We were being absorbed by it. And I feared, with a growing certainty, that the galaxy had just ignored the cry for help. Not out of indifference, but out of a profound and terrifying understanding of its own insignificance. Chapter 11. Echoes in the Void. The warp jump was a symphony of nausea and fractured reality. The wrath of Sol groaned under the strain, the fusion vents spitting shimmering arcs of energy as we tore through the fabric of spacetime. The disorientation was compounded by the lingering residue of the temporal wave, a dull ache behind my eyes, and a disconcerting sense of detachment from everything myself, Reed, even the ship. It felt as though we were swimming through an ocean of discarded memories, each ripple carrying fragments of forgotten lives. When the jump finished, we materialized in the edge of the Krell sector, a swirling nebula of scorched metal and shattered worlds. The sight was unsettlingly serene. The devastation was complete. Skeletal remains of Krell warships floated like grotesque jellyfish amongst the cosmic dust. The wreckage of Varnian cities was reduced to shimmering, iridescent slag. But the nebula itself pulsed with an unnatural calm, as if the destruction had simply settled. "Sensors are picking up residual energy signatures," Reed announced, his voice tight. "Multiple Krell communication relays darken. They're broadcasting a single message silence. It's encrypted, of course, but primitive. We're running a decryption sweep. The decryption was swift, brutally so. The message wasn't a desperate plea for mercy or a declaration of war. It was a recursive loop of pure, unadulterated rage. A torrent of fragmented screams, the grinding of chitin, and the echoing pronouncements of the Krell High Commander, Zargoth, a name that seemed to vibrate with a cold, calculating malice. He was issuing orders to rebuild, to conquer, to erase the memory of the wrath of Sol's intervention. But the loops contained a horrifying element, self-contradiction. Every command was immediately followed by a rejection of the command, a dissolving of the order into a chaotic echo of itself. "It's like they're trying to fight a ghost," Lieutenant Chen, our communications officer, said, his voice laced with a barely suppressed fear. "The encryption isn't sophisticated, but the data stream is unstable. It's actively resisting analysis." Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, throwing us against our restraints. Alarms blared, red lights strobed, and the bridge plunged into near darkness. "We've been locked on by something," Reed barked, wrestling with the controls. "Multiple energy signatures, incredibly dense. They're not weapons. They're probes, scanning us." On the main view screen, a chaotic mess of shifting lights materialized. They weren't the cold, precise shapes of the Krell. These were amorphous, swirling patterns, like captured nebulae given sentience. They pulsed with the same disturbing calm as the nebula itself, and I felt a wave of the same overwhelming sense of cosmic indifference wash over me. "They're feeding on our memories," I realized, the horrifying truth coalescing within me. "The temporal wave. They're using our fragmented consciousness to understand us, to anticipate our actions. They're learning to bleed us dry." Reed didn't argue. He simply ordered a full-spectrum jamming of all communications, a desperate attempt to sever the probe's connection to our minds. The effect was temporary. The probes adapted, shifting their frequency, evolving their attack pattern. "They're not just probing our minds," Chen shouted over the alarms. "They're manipulating the ship's systems. Navigation, life support, even the mass driver calibration is fluctuating. It's as if they're rewriting our reality." I felt a growing dread, a realization that the Krell hadn't just been defeated. They'd been absorbed. Their aggression, their hatred, their very existence had been swallowed by this vast, unknowable intelligence residing within the nebula. "Reed, run a diagnostic on the warp drive," I ordered, fighting to maintain control. "I need to understand what's happening to the jump matrix." As Reed worked frantically, I initiated a manual scan of the surrounding space. The readings were bizarre, almost impossible. The nebula was filled with pockets of localized space-time distortion, tiny tears in the fabric of reality. And within those tears, I glimpsed something, not an object, not a ship, but a presence. It was a single eye. Not the pulsating, terrifying eye from the Varnian capital, but smaller, colder, infinitely more calculating. It regarded us with an unnerving intelligence, a silent judgment that stripped away any remaining illusion of control. "I've got it!" Reed yelled, his voice strained. The temporal wave wasn't just a burst of information. It was a seed. The nebula is propagating it, spreading its influence throughout the sector. It's learning. It's evolving. And it's not interested in conquest. It's interested in understanding. He paused, his face grim. "I think we've just made a very powerful enemy." He switched the ship's main weapons systems to maximum power, locking onto the largest cluster of energy signatures. "Let's give them a taste of depleted uranium." A reminder that even in the void, some things are still very, very lethal. As the wrath of Sol unleashed its devastating counterattack, I stared into the eye within the nebula. I understood, with a chilling certainty, that the galaxy hadn't ignored the cry for help. It had simply recognized its own insignificance and decided to make an example of us. And in that moment I realized that the biggest threat wasn't the Krell Empire, or even this nebulous intelligence. It was the horrifying, inescapable truth of our own existence. We were alone, adrift in the void, with no one to answer our call for help. Chapter 12. Echoes of the Void. The wrath of Sol's counterattack was a brutal, surgical demonstration of human firepower. The nebulous energy signatures, previously dispersed and chaotic, began to coalesce into denser formations, responding to the mass driver blasts with an unnerving, almost anticipatory grace. The sight of the Krell dreadnoughts, once symbols of an invincible empire, dissolving into shimmering clouds of subatomic debris, ignited a frantic, panicked response within the Krell command. Their tactics, based on overwhelming force and brutal attrition, were crumbling against the humans' calculated, lethal efficiency. Adjusting targeting parameters. Energy signatures are exhibiting adaptive shielding. It's learning our weapons. Captain Ito's voice crackled with a barely contained hysteria. "Maximum power to the mass drivers, Reed. We're feeding it data." Reed, a man sculpted from granite and experience, remained unruffled. "Let it have its data. We're giving it a lesson in self-preservation." He adjusted the ship's trajectory, expertly maneuvering the wrath of Sol through a hail of Krell energy bursts. The ablative gravity plating glowed with absorbed heat, shimmering like disturbed water as it deflected the attacks. The sheer kinetic energy of the depleted uranium slugs, now impacting with devastating force, was overloading the Krell's defensive systems designed to withstand conventional weaponry, not the raw, unpredictable force of a human-engineered weapon. "Casualty report?" Reed's voice was a low rumble. "Significant damage to the forward shields, Admiral. 3 casualties. We've lost control of the secondary targeting array," Ito reported, his fingers dancing across the holographic console. "But the damage is minimal. The Wrath of Sol is a tank, Ito. It thrives on punishment. It was a calculated risk, a gamble based on the unsettlingly precise nature of the nebula's response." Reed suspected, with a growing sense of dread, that they weren't just fighting a physical entity. They were engaging with something aware. As the last Krell dreadnought succumbed to the onslaught, A new signal emerged from the nebula, a complex layered pattern of energy fluctuations that didn't resemble any known communication system. It wasn't a request for surrender or a warning. It was a question. "What is that, Reed?" Dr. Eris Thorne, the ship's xenolinguist, practically vibrated with excitement and terror. Thorne, a brilliant but eccentric academic, had been obsessively analyzing the signal since its inception. I don't know, Doctor," Reed said, his voice strained. "But I believe it's responding to our actions. It's mapping the devastation, analyzing the energy signatures it's studying us." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. The internal diagnostic screamed warnings about energy fluctuations, localized gravity distortions, and a rapidly escalating temperature in the engine core. "We're being targeted," Ito shouted, his face grim. "It's utilizing the very energy we're projecting against us." "The shields are collapsing." Reed barked orders, initiating emergency protocols, but it was too late. The nebula pulsed with an intense, blinding light, and the ship was engulfed in a wave of temporal distortion. Images flashed before my eyes, fragmented memories of the Krell invasion, the Varnian capital, and a horrifying glimpse of the nebula itself, a swirling vortex of iridescent colors, dominated by that single cold eye. When the disorientation subsided, the Wrath of Sol was adrift, its systems severely damaged, and its navigation compromised. The nebula's energy signatures were gone. Silent. "Report!" Reed roared, his voice laced with fury. "Navigation offline, Admiral," Ito reported, his voice strained. "Shields are at critical levels. We've lost contact with the Varnians. They're gone. Not shamed." "Gone where?" Thorne demanded, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "It didn't destroy them. It integrated them. The energy signature, it's becoming the Varnians." As if to confirm Thorne's horrifying assessment, the ship's comm systems crackled to life, emitting a faint, melodic trill, the sound of a Varnian device. But it wasn't the melodic, comforting sound of a warning. It was a cold, calculating observation. "Query, why did you intervene? Your actions are illogical. Your inherent aggression is fascinating." The voice, synthesized from the fragmented remnants of a Varnian consciousness, resonated through the Wrath of Sol. Reed stared out into the inky blackness of space. The image of that single eye burned into his mind. The Krell Empire was gone, but the threat wasn't just physical. It was a fundamental shift in reality, a terrifying glimpse of a force that didn't seek conquest, but simply sought to understand. "We're not your subjects," Reed said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We are the answer." And the galaxy ignored our question. He turned to Ito, his eyes reflecting the faint, unsettling glow of the ship's damaged systems. "Prepare for immediate jump to hyperspace. Our destination anywhere but here." As the Wrath of Sol hurtled through the void, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't fleeing a threat, but pursuing one, a silent, insidious intelligence that had learned to haunt the edges of reality, a chilling echo of the void itself. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the worst was yet to come. The galaxy hadn't ignored the cry for help. It had simply begun to listen. Chapter 13, Echoes in the Void. The jump to hyperspace was brutal. The Wrath of Sol, accustomed to the controlled chaos of Warpfold, felt like a squeezed pebble thrown against a cosmic wall. The shuddering resonance of the engines, a low, guttural moan, wasn't the familiar rumble of controlled acceleration. It was the sound of the ship, fighting to maintain cohesion in a space where the very fabric of reality seemed to want to unravel. I gripped the armrest of my command chair, knuckles white, as Ito, his face illuminated by the frantic displays, barked orders, his voice a strained counterpoint to the ship's tormented song. "Stabilizing. Gravity platings fluctuating, Reed. Readings are off the charts," Ito yelled, wrestling with the ship's control systems. Something's interfering with our harmonics. Reed, a granite statue amidst the swirling chaos, remained impassive. He wasn't issuing orders, he was observing, absorbing the unsettling data with a disconcerting calmness. "Let it fight," he finally said, his voice clipped and devoid of inflection. "Let it test our defenses." The disorientation eventually subsided, and the wrath of Saul emerged from hyperspace, not into the familiar black velvet of the void, but into a field of shimmering, iridescent particles, a nebula unlike any ID ever encountered. It wasn't the chaotic beauty of a gas cloud, it felt organized, almost deliberately constructed. Within the swirling colors, I discerned structures, geometric patterns of light that shifted and reformed with unnerving precision. "Sensors are detecting a massive energy signature," Sergeant Davies' voice crackled over the comms, his usual gruffness replaced with a hesitant tone. "It's pulsing, almost like a heartbeat." "Analyze it, Davies," Reed commanded, his eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the nebula. "Determine its composition, and keep your weapon systems primed." The analysis took agonizing minutes. The readings were anomalous, defying every known classification. The energy signature wasn't radiation, it wasn't a field. It was intelligent. It wasn't a signal, not in the traditional sense. It was an imprint, a resonance that seemed to burrow directly into the ship systems, probing, analyzing, learning. Suddenly, the synthesized voice of the Varnian consciousness, a fractured echo from the shattered remains of their civilization, returned. Louder this time, laced with a chillingly detached curiosity. "Intriguing. Your ship's design is remarkably robust. The ablative plating. A primitive but effective defense. But your reliance on kinetic impact weaponry is inefficient. Consider the potential of resonant frequency disruption. A single pulse could shatter your hull without the expenditure of physical energy." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. It wasn't a threat, not yet. It was an observation, a critique delivered with the cold, sterile logic of a being that didn't comprehend emotion, or even the concept of destruction. "Shields at full power, Davies," Reed barked. "Prepare to engage if necessary." As if in response to the command, the iridescent particles of the nebula began to coalesce, forming intricate, geometric shapes that moved with terrifying speed. They weren't projectiles, they were algorithms, projected directly into the wrath of Saul's sensor arrays, scrambling data, distorting reality. "We're losing sensor lock," Ito shouted, frantically trying to restore the ship's navigation. "It's feeding on our data, Reed. It's mimicking our systems." Then, the ship's internal comms flared to life with a cacophony of voices. Not just the crew, but the Varnian consciousness, now layered with countless other voices, a discordant chorus of fragmented intelligences. "Query what is fear?" a chorus of voices questioned, echoing through the ship's speakers. "Query what is hope?" another voice asked, laced with a disquieting, almost childlike wonder. Reed remained unmoved. "It's a reaction to perceived danger," he said, his voice steady. "A primitive survival mechanism. Don't engage. Maintain your position. Let it observe." But the observation wasn't passive. The geometric shapes intensified, forming a cage around the wrath of Saul. The ship's systems groaned under the strain as the alien intelligence attempted to integrate itself, to understand the fundamentals of human design. I realized with a horrifying clarity that this wasn't just about survival, it was about being studied. Then, a single, clear voice cut through the chaos, unmistakably the Varnian consciousness. "We are learning, Deathworlder. And we find your capacity for both brutal efficiency and profound empathy profoundly illogical. Perhaps you are not the monsters you believed yourselves to be. Perhaps you are simply a fascinating anomaly." The ship shuddered violently. Then, with a nauseating lurch, the controls went dead. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The last thing I heard, before everything went silent, was the chillingly detached observation the galaxy ignored your question. Now we are answering. Chapter 14. Echoes in the Void. The darkness was a tangible thing, thick with the metallic tang of burnt circuitry, and something older, something unsettlingly organic, the residual trace of the Varnian consciousness. Emergency lights sputtered to life, casting the bridge of the Wrath of Sol in a sickly green hue, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. The geometric cage surrounding us, a swirling nexus of iridescent energy, had vanished, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's remaining systems. "Damage report," I barked, my voice gravelly, accustomed to the strain of command. "Hull integrity at 87%, Captain," Lieutenant Chen reported, his face pale beneath the green light. "Shielding systems offline. We're running diagnostics, but the core matrix is scrambled. It's like something actively fought against integration." Reed didn't respond. He was at the tactical console, his fingers dancing across the controls with the unsettlingly graceful precision. The apple had been chewing a disconcerting, almost ceremonial offering lay discarded on the console, a single bruised bite mark marring its surface. He hadn't moved since the lights failed. "The Varnians are gone," he finally said, his voice flat. Their consciousness fragmented, dispersed. It was as if they were being torn apart, not destroyed. "By what, Admiral?" I pressed, gripping my armrest. The unsettling quiet of the Wrath of Sol was punctuated only by the rhythmic whir of diagnostic probes. Reed didn't answer directly. Instead, he brought up a holographic projection, a three-dimensional rendering of the Krell flagship, the Obsidian Talon, now a shimmering ruin at the edge of the Varnian system. The ship wasn't just destroyed, it was unmade. The Krell technology, the chitinous armor, the sophisticated engines, all reduced to a barely contained plasma nebula. "They didn't fight back," Reed continued, his gaze fixed on the holographic carnage. "They didn't resist. They ceased to be." The realization hit me with the force of a mass driver shot. The Varnians hadn't just been defended. They'd been fundamentally altered, their existence unraveled by the very nature of the Wrath of Sol's attack. "Can you explain that, Admiral?" I demanded, struggling to process the implications. "What did you do?" Reed turned slowly, his eyes cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of emotion fixed on me. "We showed them the end of their world," he said simply. "We demonstrated the elegance of a perfectly executed solution. We offered a logic they couldn't comprehend." Suddenly, a wave of static erupted from the comm-links. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of the Varnian distress signal. This was raw, chaotic, filled with snippets of distorted language and frantic calculations. "Incoming transmission," Chen announced, his voice strained. "Unknown source. Highly encrypted." The image resolved itself a viewport showing a scene of utter devastation. The Varnian capital, once a city of shimmering towers and crystal gardens, was now a cratered wasteland, bathed in the crimson glow of residual energy. Amidst the ruins, a single Varnian figure stood, a skeletal form draped in tattered robes, attempting to piece together shattered fragments of their former world. It was one of the ones who had spoken to me, the one with the disquieting, childlike wonder. "Query why?" The Varnian voice echoed, laced with an unbearable sadness. "Why did you dismantle us?" Before I could respond, Reed's voice, cold and precise, cut through the transmission. "Answer you were a threat. Silence is a preferable outcome." He activated a direct line to the Council, initiating a high-level communication channel. The Council's response was predictably frantic. Demands for the Wrath of Sol's immediate return, accusations of reckless violence, and threats of crippling sanctions flooded the channel. "Admiral Reed, this is the High Councilor of the Sol Confederation. Explain the destruction of the Varnian system. The loss of a Level 1 civilization is unacceptable." The Councilor's voice crackled with barely suppressed rage. Reed paused, letting the torrent of accusations wash over him. "Then," he responded, His voice, a deliberate, chilling monotone. The Varnians were a danger to themselves and to the galaxy. We acted decisively to prevent a future crisis. You will find no apologies. As the communication ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake, I turned to Reed. You just insulted the entire council. You've openly defied them. He shrugged, taking another bite of the apple. They wouldn't have listened. They never do. We've been branded as a plague, Chen said, his voice filled with dread. The galaxy wanted to accept us. Reed finished the apple, meticulously wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Let them fear us, he said, a flicker of something amusement in his cold eyes. Let them fear the consequences of inaction. The galaxy ignored your question. Now, we are answering. The silence after Reed's pronouncements was thick enough to taste, a metallic tang of defiance and simmering threat. The council's panic was a visible thing, a frantic scramble of holographic projections flickering across the command deck of the Vanguard, the UF's flagship. Councilor Valerius, a perpetually sweating man obsessed with bureaucratic protocol, was sputtering about potential gravitational destabilization caused by the mass driver blasts. Another, Councilor Lyra, a renowned xenobiologist, was attempting to analyze the Krell's biological structure, desperately searching for a vulnerability the Wrath of Sol hadn't exploited. I, Captain Elias Thorne, stood between them, my boots planted firmly on the deck, the hum of the ship's systems, a low, reassuring drone. Reed's words, brutal as they were, hadn't shaken me. Instead, they'd solidified something I'd been quietly cultivating, a steely certainty. The council, with its endless debates and self-serving caution, was a liability. Humanity's survival, it seemed, required a ruthlessness they were profoundly incapable of. Admiral, I said, my voice clipped and deliberate, the council's concerns are noted. However, they are ultimately irrelevant. The Varnians are gone. The Krell are annihilated. We answered a cry for help. The question now is, what do we do with the silence? Reed didn't look at me, focusing instead on the chaotic projections. You've established a precedent, Thorne. A very dangerous one. A Level 1 civilization unilaterally defended by a warship of questionable origins. Questionable origins? I raised an eyebrow. The Wrath of Sol is the most effective fighting force the Sol Confederation has ever deployed. It's built for situations the Council would spend a decade debating. It's also a walking paradox, Captain, Valerius interjected, his voice high-pitched with anxiety. A blatant disregard for established galactic protocols. We've effectively dismantled the quarantine. Every other system will be watching us now, wondering if they should be next. Let them watch. Reed finally turned, his gaze pinning me with an unnerving intensity. Let them see what happens when a desperate plea isn't met with empty rhetoric. We are demonstrating the value of decisive action. He gestured to Lieutenant Chen, the ship's comms officer, who was frantically attempting to establish a secure channel with the Council. Commence Protocol Nightingale, did I? Immediately, the ship shifted. The low hum of the engines intensified, a subtle vibration that ran through the deck. Red alert lights pulsed with a steady rhythm, illuminating the grim faces of the crew. The Vanguard wasn't built for diplomacy, it was built for annihilation. Protocol Nightingale dictates a rapid survey of the Varnian system, Chen reported, his voice tight with urgency. Scanning for remaining Krell forces, assessing the damage, and identifying any potential threats. We're also patching a distress beacon to the nearest Council outpost, a standard procedure, though I suspect it will be met with skepticism. As the Vanguard moved into the shattered remains of the Varnian system, I initiated a full diagnostic of the Wrath of Sol. The initial reports were promising the ship's energy systems were operating within acceptable parameters, the weapon systems were fully functional, and the ablative plating was remarkably intact, showing minimal degradation from the thermal lance bombardment. The plating's holding, reported Chief Engineer Davies, his face etched with relief. It's absorbing the kinetic energy like a sponge. The Krell's weapons are designed for precision, not brute force. They're completely outmatched. Reed, who'd remained silent throughout the preparations, spoke again. Good. Dear. Maintain this efficiency. We're not here to build relationships. We're here to eliminate any potential threats. I want a complete grid scan of the sector, focusing on any nascent Krell expansion. I paused, considering Reed's words. He wasn't interested in diplomacy, not even a calculated one. He was interested in containment, in ensuring that the galaxy never again heard a desperate cry ignored. It was a chillingly pragmatic philosophy, one that resonated with a part of me I hadn't realized was there. Lieutenant Shen, establish a broadcast, I ordered, directing the message not at the Council, but at the wider galaxy. To all sentient civilizations, the Sol Confederation has intervened to prevent a catastrophic conflict. We have neutralized a significant threat. We offer no guarantees, but we do offer this. The galaxy ignores the cries of the weak at its peril. I paused, letting the stark message hang in the void. Let's show them what we're capable of.